Well, it's a great pleasure to be with you here today and provide a little overview on this report. The first thing we should note is the people who did all the heavy lifting on this. Judy Liu ran this project, and Michael Poser put together the report itself. Before we get underway, for the benefit of folks who are in the room, and apologies to people who are watching at a distance, I'd like to take just a minute and ask you to introduce yourself to the other folks at your table. Many of you don't know each other, and some people just came in, so let's take just a minute, say hello to the people at your table so you meet them and build your social networks. Okay. And if we could begin to bring the conversation in the room to a close, and I should say that if anybody gets a new job out of this conversation, GSA gets a 10% commission right off the top here. Well, I think what we would like to do, as James was saying, with this report is change the conversation a bit. But let me just set the stage before I move us to some of the specific details of the report. If you could have wished for a change for American society that would be an unmitigated good thing, it might be this one, that we would live 7 years longer than our parents, depending how old you are, that we would live out of those 7 years many more healthy and active years, so that it turns out that the years of infirmity that we are likely on average to experience will actually be shorter in absolute terms than our parents. So this is a gift of many years of additional healthy life. Right? And it's hard to imagine something that would be more positive than that. This is an absolute boom. It is true that it makes the population of the U.S. older than it would be otherwise. That, as we'll see in a moment, is not a bad thing. This is partly in the U.S. because the baby boom is getting older, but the baby boom will recede from the scene at some point, and the U.S. population will remain older. That's only part of the story. It is not unlike in our competitor countries in the industrial world because the birth rate has dropped sharply. It is largely because of these additional years of life expectancy, which is an amazing blessing. Nevertheless, there are some challenges with this. Their challenges are eminently solvable. Right? We just have to pay some attention to them. One of the things that concerned us in the report, though, is the sense that the conversation has gone particularly negative. And that is mainly by people who frankly are worried about the issues of retirement income, something we'll hear more about in a minute. But we believe that they are losing the big picture here, which is why we want to talk about this report. And I think, frankly, a lot of this is generated by economists who study certain aspects of retirement. This also led to something that my wife developed after years of being around universities. This is the sort of behind every silver lining there's a cloud thing. Virginia calls this, we call this Virginia's iron law of party giving. And the iron law says you cannot have more than 10% or 2 economists at a party or it will kill the party. Right? And there's certainly something to be said for that in this context here. So what we'd like to do is change the conversation here a little bit and think about the positive aspects of this. And some of it you could see if we simply change the language. If instead of saying we have an aging population, if we said we have a more experienced population, we have a more grown-up population, we have a more mature population, if we had terms with more positive connotations, at least in the American context, the story would probably change a little bit. And if you really think this is a bad thing, that the U.S. population is aging because we're living longer and healthier, think about what the alternative would be and try to sell that story to the American people. And that story would be, things would be a whole lot better if you'd all die sooner, right? That is not a story that you're going to get a lot of positive people lining up to get behind, right? So let's talk about the report itself here, and let me move you through a few of the important parts. And this is me. So let's get to the population pyramid here, and this is a figure that you probably have seen in some context before. This describes the population of a country. It's usually men in blue, in this case women in green, and the width of the bar tells you how many people are in that age cohort. So it's typically 5-year cohorts, right? And you can see in the 1960s, the very beginning of the baby boom down there, right, when we had lots and lots of young people. By 2060, you can see the population is pretty regular. And by the way, that is exactly what you would hope for a labor force, an economy, a population, is to have roughly as many 40-year-olds as you have 20-year-olds, as you have 10-year-olds. Why is that a good thing? You don't have to keep building schools and shrinking them down. You don't have to keep building new retirement communities and shrinking them down, right? You don't have to worry about entry-level jobs, suddenly demand for those spiking up and then disappearing afterwards. If you look at our other countries around the world, every single developed country in the world has an aging population. They're all aging faster than the U.S., and if you look at their population pyramids, they are actually inverted. Right? There are far more old people than there are young people in every one of the developed countries in Europe and in Asia. So we've got just about the Goldilocks demographics here compared to any other country in the world, and that is a wonderful thing. Just a couple of the call-out points here, and we already heard this one from Axel, who is on our committee here. Here are the things we want to talk about in the report, and just to tick down them a little bit here. Some of this is about dealing with the myths that are unfortunately driving a lot of the conversation about older individuals and the aging of the U.S. Economy. Some of that has to do with recognition that as people get older, it's not one size fits all, and there might be quite distinct categories of people that have different interests, different abilities, different needs. Not one size fits all is an important realization. We're going to talk about some of the policy opportunities, although I think the report is careful not to make policy recommendations. We are certainly pointing toward policy directions. So we'll move through these in some order here pretty quickly. And the first is a very important one, and this is the idea that there are myths about older individuals that are persistent. And they are, like most myths, completely wrong. And here are the ones that I think we are focused on, and that is that older individuals are actually pretty well functioning, and increasingly so now with these additional years of longer life, right? So the idea of 65-year-olds today looking like 65-year-olds in our parents' generation, and many of those folks were infirm, is absolutely not true. So we have to update our expectations, and you can see some of the important facts here, particularly the view that people end up in nursing homes and care facilities. It's a pretty small part of the older population for whom that it is true, and it tends only to be at the very end of their lives, right? The 5 phases of aging here is something we will talk about more in just a second. The reason it matters to understand these 5 phases is because of the policy issues that are associated with them. The business opportunities for supporting these folks, right, are all quite different depending which age group we're thinking about. So let's talk about what they look like. This top one, the go-go phase, this basically means that for many older individuals, including people well into their 90s, not much changes. They want to work full-time. They're continuing to work full-time. They maintain the same kind of active schedule that they maintained when they were younger. And for those folks, we need maybe some different kinds of support, but mainly the support is a lifting of discrimination and prejudice around them simply because they're older. The group underneath them, this go slower phase, this is a group that we could do a lot more for. Right? These are folks who are active, continue to be active. They have some restrictions on their abilities, but not that many. And you can see as we work our way down the list, the folks whose health is poor. And you can see the key factor here, it's not age, it's health. Right? Some of the illnesses might be age-related, but the distinction is not about age. It's not that at this age you move into poor health. It's not that at this age you are in the go-go phase. It has to do with your health. Health is kind of unpredictable, but the fact of the matter is we have, among the older population, people in very different levels of capability. Okay? Oops, that is not the button we want to push, and I hope this was the next one. So let's talk about the economy and the issues of older workers in the economy, and I should say this is one I'm particularly interested in, being in a business school and thinking about the labor force. And the key issue here is that older individuals want to keep working, and that's been true for quite a while. One of the things that we were quite concerned about was the declining labor force participation of U.S. individuals, particularly men. The interesting evidence, some of it just out recently this week from the Social Security data, showing that the labor force participation rates of older individuals, that is their willingness to be at work or to seek jobs, has increased quite a bit, reasonably steadily over the last decade or so. So older individuals want to work, they're increasingly working or they're trying to work, and that is going to be very important for understanding the key challenge, which is how are we paying for these additional years of life expectancy. So moving through some of our, let's see, I think we had some more call-outs here on this one, but maybe not. We're going to talk a little bit as well about the role of producers and consumers. That is, older individuals have a lot of money to spend now, big part of the population with baby boomers, and this is something that the business community and employers ought to pay attention to, particularly if you would like, as most businesses now are feeling, that your employee workforce looks like your customers. Okay? Here are some of the myths in the report that we're going to try to dispel. Some of these have to do with the idea that, okay, there's not going to be enough younger workers. That's not true. The number of individuals entering the labor force is really not changing very much at all. We don't have the Japan problem or the Spain or Italy problem of sharply declining birth rates, so that's just simply not true. The dependency ratio is something we're going to talk about, and that is how many people are working versus how many people are retired, right? For Social Security, this matters a lot. And as the labor force participation rates increase, we need to adjust our view on that. So we've been operating with estimates based on a previous generation, and people are responding to the longer life and, frankly, the need for more money, but also the greater health and the willingness to stay active and stay in the workforce longer. The lump of labor theory, that if people who are older will work longer, there won't be jobs for younger people. There's certainly some truth to that at the very micro level. If you're in a company where people have decided not to retire this year, it does block opportunities for those people who wanted that job. In the economy as a whole, though, this is not true. We know there's no myth. I mean, the myth of a lump of labor that economy can only employ this many people is not true, right? So you might see it in your own experience in an individual company or organization, but that doesn't generalize to the economy as a whole. Okay? And the last one, which is the one that I find the most onerous, is the myth that older individuals are somehow less productive. There is zero evidence for this, and if you want to test this, ask yourself the following question. Somebody goes to the hospital, for example, and they say, give me the oldest doctor. Well, people would laugh at them. But if you said, give me the most experienced doctor, they would say, well, of course, right? And the fact here is that experience and age are extremely correlated. And one of the things we know about people's job performance is it goes up with experience. And some of this, as the psychologist of aging described this, is because of crystallized intelligence. We learn more, and we know more as a result of all this experience. Absenteeism is less for older individuals. Turnover rates are actually less. And surprisingly, there's evidence that even health costs for employers are not much higher for older individuals. Here's why. Older individuals don't have babies. Thank God, right? So I'm in that group myself. That would be a bad, bad thing, right? And a big chunk of healthcare for employers is the families of the employees. It's not just the individuals. So on almost every dimension of the workforce that we care about, performance goes up with people as they age. Right? Let's talk about the consumer role here. And this is basically the idea that older individuals have a lot of money to spend. What they want to buy may be slightly different. And if you would like to access that community, you probably have to pay some more attention to them as a consumer group. Stop chasing the millennials and start thinking about this older group, which frankly is far bigger in terms of numbers, and also they've got most of the money right now. And here are just a few things about the size of this population. You could see the travel budget, how much people who are in the older age groups are spending on travel. Buttons here. And of course healthcare, which some of that is voluntary and things that we can choose. And some of us will remember Willard Scott on the Today Show. Do you remember Willard Scott used to have this little call out of somebody who turned 100 years old that day, and everybody thought that was an amazing thing. And Willard Scott would be out of business, of course, if he had to do this now, because there's so many people turning 100 all the time now that it's not exactly news anymore, and that will be increasingly so in the future. The number of people who are working who are older already is a very big number, and the amount of money that they're earning and spending is also a very big number. Okay? Let's say some things about what we could learn from our peer countries elsewhere where populations are aging much faster than ours. We can learn some things from them, and they're pretty simple, I think. None of these are extremely complicated. One that we have to address is that older individuals probably need to work longer. The good news compared to other countries, Europe and Asia in particular, is that in the U.S. people want to work longer. So the evidence on this has been very strong. 75% or so of individuals facing retirement age say they would like to keep working in some way. That doesn't mean they want to keep doing the same job the same way, but it does mean they want to continue to work in the labor force, or sometimes not, sometimes as volunteers, all of which contributes to the society though. Paid labor is particularly important because it helps support these longer lives and helps support what taxpayers would otherwise have to pay. And so if we could encourage that in the U.S., that would go a long way toward dealing with the main challenge of an older population. We can learn a fair bit here from Germany, which had a problem with respect to their aging population, a financial problem, and that was how were they paying for this, and their equivalent pension social security systems were really being burdened and at the point of needing very serious changes. Germany solved this problem actually quite quickly with a series of changes to those systems that encourage people to work longer. Some of this was simply delaying pension eligibility or Social Security equivalent eligibility, but some of it was greater economic incentives, less penalties for working longer. And they have turned Germany into a kind of success story in Europe for having older individuals working longer, more engaged in the workforce. Japan has not actually, I don't think, the biggest aging or the most aging population in the world, but they're right up there at the very top, and it's a very big economy. One of the things the Japanese government has done is create centers for older individuals, sort of like the one-stop shops in the U.S. and the employment services, to try to engage older individuals in finding ways to contribute, trying to get them jobs, trying to get them, if not in paid employment, into voluntary activities where they're contributing back to society. Singapore has an innovation which I think it might be very interesting in the U.S. It doesn't actually require any legislation. It's something that any U.S. company can do given the way employment laws work. And in Singapore, the innovation there was at age 63, you and your employer could sit down and decide what you want to do next. All of your prior practices in the employment in that company, your status in that company, your current salary in that company, your job title are broken at that point at 63. Boom, which was the retirement age. So you're basically talking to your employer now and saying, okay, everything we've done is off the table. What would we like to do next? What would I like to do as an employee? What would you like me to do? What I did before doesn't matter. What I was paid before doesn't matter. Let's think about going forward, what works for the company and what works for me as an individual, right? A recontracting as we approach retirement age, which again in the U.S. doesn't require any legislation to do that. We talk in the report about the policy opportunities, and they fall in three categories. With respect to the labor market, I think the biggest issue is to try to do something about age discrimination in the U.S. By many measures, age discrimination is a bigger factor than discrimination against other protected groups. The tech industry, our colleagues there, have made this actually worse, I think, frankly, with the perception that tech is a young person's game and only a young person's game. The focus on millennials is another, I think, factor which has made this worse, even though it's not explicitly a discrimination against older individuals. If you tell people that young people are cool, you don't have to really finish the sentence and say everybody else is not, right? So I think that's a very important thing we've got to deal with. It might not be public policy per se, it might be social policy, and it might be the kind of thing that organizations and businesses could take on and support. I think for employers as well, being able to tap into this population which is experienced, which has good social and interpersonal skills, which wants to work and is not concerned about long-term careers. One of the things that bedevils employers right now is younger people who want to tell them, where will I be in 10 years, right? Tapping into this population, particularly as the labor market gets hot, seems like an extremely sensible thing to do. With respect to retirement, the big issue here, it seems to me, is to think about how we might be more flexible in phasing in retirements. This is not a new concept, but it's becoming a much bigger one, again, as we should be trying to get people to stay with us longer given the tight labor market. Phased retirement means you don't just go from working full-time today to completely stopping tomorrow, but you can gradually phase out your employment with that company. Okay? And the last issue has to do with tax policies. Some of this might have to do with incentives to make it easier for older individuals to stay in the workforce, create more incentives for them to join the workforce if they're not there right now. So you can see the direction we're going here, and this is to change the conversation a little bit, and we hope actually, frankly, a lot. And you can see some of the buzzwords up here, or the phrases that were common on the left side, and we're hoping we can move the conversation in the direction of the right side. And our last little quote here, this is from Jimmy Buffett. I think he was in Margaritaville when he wrote this one because it didn't make complete sense to me. But let me tell you what I think he's saying, and that is he's saying, I would like, while I am still alive, to keep active and keep working. This is much better than simply waiting to die, which I think we would all agree with. And I think the heart of this issue is this incredible bonus, blessing we've been given of additional years of life expectancy and additional years of healthy life. What are we going to do to make this happen? What are we going to do to make it work for everybody in society and make the best use of these additional years of life? Kevin Crane is going to pick it up from here and talk about some of the particular issues around retirement, which are central to both the practical and policy debates. Kevin, over to you.